AI companies. Who's going to win? You don't need to know every company. Nvidia, Google, OpenAI. Honestly, nobody knows who will end up wearing the crown. But here's the funny part. No matter who wins, the company paying the same tax every single time is always the same. Every time AI advances by one step, big tech has no choice but to share profits with TSMC, like a tax. There are a few companies that hold the foundational infrastructure of the AI era, and those are the ones worth studying deeply. And near the top of that list, one of the first names that shows up is TSMC. All right, let's talk AII. What's the most valuable asset in the world today? Land, gold, dollars? Sure, those matter. But if you zoom out and think in 10 or 20-year terms, compute, processing power, or more simply, semiconductors are becoming the real asset of the modern era. To run a single AI model like ChatGPT, you need an absurd amount of chips, electricity, and servers. And what's the common denominator behind all of it? Foundries, the factories that physically print semiconductors into reality. Wait, isn't Nvidia the main character? Aren't Google, Microsoft, Amazon, those guys the real AI monsters? Yes, they're the face of AI services and platforms. But here's one critical fact. They don't actually manufacture the core chips themselves. Nvidia designs the chips. But there's a different company that takes that blueprint and literally engraves it onto silicon. That company is TSMC. To put it bluntly, chips from Nvidia, Apple, AMD, Qualcomm, even Tesla have reached a point where the industry is basically structured like this. Without TSMC, nobody can make them. That's why some people say, we don't know who the final winner of AI will be, but we do know the guaranteed number 2, TSMC. Let's break down why that statement even exists. The semiconductor industry can be broadly split into two sides. Companies that design chips, fabless. Companies that manufacture chips, foundries. Nvidia, Apple, AMD, Qualcomm, they're fabless companies. They specialize in designing chips, deciding what to build and how to build it. TSMC, on the other hand, is the company that does something completely different. It's the factory that turns that complex blueprint into physical reality. Up to this point, you might think, come on, a factory business is just buying equipment, building buildings, hiring workers. So eventually China, Korea, or the U.S. can just build the same thing, right? It sounds reasonable. But semiconductors are different. This isn't a simple factory. It's a technological fortress built on decades of accumulated mastery in math, physics, chemistry, process engineering, equipment control, and massive amounts of manufacturing data. You've probably heard that ASML's lithography machines are among the most complex machines ever created by humans. But here's what's wild. Even that final boss machine is just one component inside TSMC's hundreds of manufacturing steps. In other words, semiconductors aren't an industry where one great machine wins. They're an industry where the end product is completed by one thing, yield. And that brings us to the single most important word in this entire story. Yield. What is yield? Imagine you etch 100 chips onto a single wafer. How many of those chips actually work? For example, Company A gets 60 good chips out of 100, 60% yield. TSMC gets 90 good chips out of 100, 90% yield. Same equipment, same time, same wafer. But the number of chips you can actually sell is completely different. And right there, the game changes. With higher yield, TSMC's cost per chip drops dramatically. And even while lowering costs, it can keep margins thicker. That's the truly terrifying moat of TSMC. A lot of people think TSMC is great because it spends huge money on equipment and capex. But the real core of the moat is yield. And yield has a hidden flywheel inside it. The number one foundry gets the hardest jobs in the world. Why? Because if a lesser foundry fails on a cutting-edge chip, a product launch can collapse entirely. From Apple's perspective, from Nvidia's perspective, from AMD's perspective. When you're betting your entire product cycle, you have no choice. You take your hardest chips to the foundry with the highest chance of success, the one with the best yield. So what happens? The most advanced, most difficult chips, the bleeding edge volume, concentrates into TSMC. That means TSMC gets the most opportunities to run new experiments. It accumulates the most try-and-error data. And as that happens, its yield improves faster than competitors. As yield improves, costs fall. As costs fall, TSMC can offer pricing that competitors struggle to match. And even then, TSMC's margins stay thicker. This flywheel keeps spinning. Better customers, more advanced attempts, yield improves, costs drop, margins rise, even better customers. Over time, TSMC stops being just a factory. It becomes a yield and data empire that competitors can't realistically catch. Building a new fab might be possible if you have enough money. But decades of accumulated yield experience, that is not something you can buy instantly, no matter how much capital you throw at it. That's why the first question you should ask when you look at TSMC isn't, how much will it earn? It's, who could actually take this position away? And honestly, right now, it's hard to see an answer. That's the hidden, real moat of TSMC. So naturally, the next question is, okay, but what about the U.S.? If national security matters and America throws money at building local foundries, won't U.S. foundries eventually rise and replace TSMC? It's true. The U.S. wants semiconductor supply chains on its own soil for security reasons, so it hands out subsidies, offers tax incentives, and pressures TSMC. Come build fabs in Arizona. But here's the interesting part. Even in that entire movement, TSMC is still at the center. Because what the U.S. really wants isn't any foundry, any factory. What it wants is a proven number one with proven top-tier yield and top-tier technology, manufacturing on U.S. soil. Because in the AI era, a failed ramp to mass production becomes a national security risk. If Nvidia can't ramp 3-nanometer or 2-nanometer chips and deliveries slip for months, the damage isn't limited to gaming or cloud companies. It spills into national competitiveness. So the U.S., Europe, and Japan are all stuck in a tug-of-war. They want domestic foundries. but they also know they're late. Meanwhile, what strategy is TSMC using? Fine, we'll build fabs in your countries. But the real engine, the technology, the yield know-how, the process expertise, stays with us. In simple terms, the coordinates of the factories may spread across the U.S., Japan, and Europe, but the brain and the heart of the system still remain in TSMC's control. And ironically, the more countries try to diversify supply chains for security, the more TSMC's importance grows. Because whenever the question appears, where do we manufacture 3 nanometers or 2 nanometers at scale? The answer keeps coming back. If you care about yield, you go with TSMC. That's why people call TSMC the guaranteed number 2 of the AI era. No matter who dominates AI services, the number of companies that can manufacture the core chips underneath is limited. AI, semiconductors, cloud, software. These are industries that scale across the entire world. They don't depend on one country's population. They don't stop at borders. They grow against global demand. And among them, if you narrow the conditions down, a company that rides the massive AI wave, has some protection against inflation, and is a manufacturing business that accumulates intangible assets through yield. You keep running into the same name, TSMC. Now, there's one thing we need to address. A lot of people ask, isn't TSMC just a company that runs factories well? Does it really have the explosive growth story of Nvidia or Apple? Is it a growth stock or just a stable infrastructure stock? The honest answer is, it's a bit of both. It won't grow like a startup that 10 times or 20 times revenue, it's already enormous. But as AI and advanced node demand grows, TSMC becomes something like a supermarket that sells only the most expensive products. In simple terms, the more the world demands harder, more advanced, more expensive chips, the higher TSMC's average selling price rises. And as we discussed, the more cutting-edge orders concentrate into the number 1 node. The more yield improves, the lower costs become, and the thicker margins grow. So TSMC is less like a crazy explosive growth stock, and more like a monster manufacturing company that controls premium infrastructure in the AI era, with yield and process know-how as its moat. In the short term, it can look boring. The stock swings. It reacts to politics, the U.S., China, Taiwan. But if you zoom out to a 10 or 20-year time frame, it becomes hard to ignore the fact that every road in AI, cloud, and smart devices passes through TSMC's manufacturing lines at least once. And that leads to a second investment point. How much weight do you assign to AI in your life? If you think AI is just a temporary trend, then you don't really need to study TSMC. But if you believe AI will reshape society like electricity and the internet did, then skipping the foundational infrastructure companies behind it might be a missed opportunity. At this point, you're probably thinking, okay, I get it. TSMC matters. But should I buy it now? When should I buy it? Is it cheap or expensive? That's the most natural question in the world. But the message I want to give you today isn't buy it right now. If anything, It's closer to the opposite. Don't hear this story. Feel the hype and smash the buy button blindly. Instead, use this video to create a slot in your portfolio, a slot called AI Era Infrastructure. Then think seriously about what you want to put in that slot. Maybe it's Nvidia. Maybe it's Microsoft. Maybe it's Apple, Google, Amazon. But at least one of those candidates should be a company that actually manufactures AI chips at scale. And at the top of that list, TSMC almost always ends up there because of 4 reasons: the yield moat of the number one foundry, the concentration of advanced node demand in the AI era, TSMC's role as a strategic asset needed by the U.S., Europe, and Japan, and the strange reality that the more supply chains split, the more TSMC's importance grows. That's why TSMC is like the electric company of the AI era. Finally, why did we have to tell this story at length? We could have ended with, TSMC is great. AI is the future. Buy it. But if you invest like that, you repeat the same mistakes. You buy because someone said it's good. When it drops a little, you panic and sell. When it rises again, you regret it. Repeat that pattern a few times, and both your mindset and your portfolio get worn down. So I wanted to tell you something different. Understand the structure before you jump to the conclusion. Why inflation happens. What changes when globalization reverses. Why the location of factories matters less than yield and process know-how. And who is truly non-optional in the AI chip wave. If you can build that structure in your mind, you don't just understand one stock. You change how you see the news, industries, and opportunities that will come next. At that point, you're no longer chasing tips. You're building wealth at your own pace, with your own logic based on your own understanding. And in that process, I believe TSMC is a company that belongs on your study desk at least once. That's what today was about. Why TSMC is worth studying deeply in the AI era. If you truly understand this, one day you'll be able to say, I still don't know who the final winner of AI will be. But now I know who the guaranteed number 2 is, and I understand what it means to quietly hold a piece of that company in my own assets. Thanks for staying with me to the end. Now it's your turn. Create a slot in your portfolio called AI Era Infrastructure. And think, slowly but clearly, what name you want to write in that slot.